Good morning. I'm going to provide you some helpful hints about the lab report on the Bird and Worm Natural Selection Lab that's due this Friday, April the 3rd. So when you begin, when you begin typing up the report, use some programs such as Microsoft Word. Set your font size to 12-point font and set your margins to 1 inch on top and bottom and both sides. Okay. Then you will start with a title page, a descriptive title for your report. It should be unique to you. And then put your name, the class Biology 102, and the date that you are typing the report, and center those 4 things on the first page. Then you will begin typing some text for your report. And you will begin with an introduction. So, you would type introduction in all capital letters and center it in the middle of the your first page, and then have several paragraphs that, number 1, talk about some previous studies on birds and worms that have been simulated. I will do my best to send you some links to these by the end of today, which today is March the 30th. You can talk about camouflage, camouflage as an adaptation, how natural selection influences favorable adaptations like camouflage. You should, at the end of the introduction, have a hypothesis where you predict which of the 5 colors of worms, aka toothpicks, would be the most likely to survive in the grassy lawn. Once you have provided a hypothesis, you should then have an objective statement to say that your objective was to test this hypothesis and determine which worm colors were the best or most favorable in the grassy lawn environment that was in front of the theater at Barton College. So you have finished your introduction. Now you're going to talk about, in the next section, you're going to talk about methods. You should not plagiarize the methods that are in the lab report, or not the lab report, but the lab that I have posted in that lab report module. You should summarize them, that the study occurred at the theater, in front of the theater in the grassy lawn, that the size of the plot was about 14 meters squared. We used initially 20 toothpicks of 5 different colors: green, white, yellow, orange, and blue. And there were 2 parts to the lab: a feeding, or a set of 6 feeding trials, each of 10 seconds. And part B, or the second part, was how would each population of worms, how would their population grow over 3 generations? So you should summarize that type of information into 1 or several paragraphs, and that would become then your methods. You should talk also at the end as to how the data was analyzed. We calculated means for the feeding trials, and we plotted a graph or a figure for the 3 generations. Okay, now you can proceed to the third part, which is results. This is usually the poorest part of a lab report that the majority of students submit, and this has been over the last 5 years for certain. You should have a table in your lab report. The table should be identified as Table 1, and then there should be a title to the table. You should have 2 rows and 6 columns. You should include the data for the feeding trials, the 10-second feeding trials, in this table. That was part 1 of the lab. So that should give you some indication as to whether or not the hypothesis that you proposed in the introduction has any validity or not. Would you accept it or would you reject it based upon the data that you provide in Table 1? You should also have a couple sentences that talk about the numbers that you put in Table 1. Which color of toothpick was eaten the least or selected the least? Which toothpick was selected the most, if you will? So you should explain the data that you put into Table 1. And this data is actually derived from Bio 102 classes from the past 5 years. So it's a fairly large data set. Your results should also include, for part 2 of the methods, a graph. You can use Microsoft Excel or some sort of spreadsheet and put the data that's I provided, that's within the lab report module. You can put that data into a spreadsheet and then plot each of the 5 worm colors, starting with an initial number of 4 worms and then plotting the growth of each population over 3 generations. So you have generation on the x-axis and number of worms on the y-axis. I hope you're not going cuckoo listening to this video. Haha. So, at the bottom of the figure, you have Figure 1 with a title. I love cuckoo clocks. There. So, you then have several sentences that you explain Figure 1. Put some numbers. The green population grew from 4 to 397. Have a few sentences that explain what happens with the graph. The blue population, I believe, one of the populations went to 0, and the others did not grow very well at all compared to the green. So, use your results to explain the data that you present in the table and in the figure, in the graph. Then you will move to the discussion section. So you'll put a discussion in all capital letters and center it. And then your discussion is when you go back to the original papers that you mentioned in the introduction and you show how your data is supported by their data. So you can talk about how camouflage is supported as an adaptation. And try to find some papers that illustrate this kind of concept. So your discussion is when you discuss your results, and you discuss your results based upon what other people have found. So you try to find some papers, some published papers that support the results that Bio 102 classes have came up with the past 5 years. I would assume that we would have had similar results if we had done this lab as well. The final thing that you put into your lab report is a literature cited. Again, all caps centered in the middle of the piece of paper. You should have at least 5 references. Anytime when you're writing your lab report and you use information that does not come from your head, you cite that information. So I have over on the left Smith 2008 in parentheses. Anytime you use information that is not yours, you reference it with parentheses and then author or author's name first, and then date of publication, if that is available. That's the APA method, if you will, of citing. And then you use the APA method when you are listing each of your at least 5 references. If you want to use 10, that just looks that much better, and that shows me that you're trying that much harder. So there is a rubric on Canvas. It's within the lab report module, and I believe I did not change the number value to 100 points. I think I left it at 50, but just double each of the points that are in that rubric, and it will total up to 100. So in your paper with literature cited, start your paper with a title page. You should end up with somewhere between, let's just say, 4 pages of typed text material with a table and a figure located in the results section. Your results should present your results and talk about them, and relating them back to the hypothesis that you set up in the introduction. Your discussion should discuss your results based upon the results that several other authors have published. Okay, so I hope that will help you, and whenever you submit your lab report, I hope that this might help in some way to enhance your grade. So y'all have a great day. I will try to send you some references of some of the other simulated labs that have used things like pasta or pipe cleaners to simulate this birdworm lab. So y'all take care. I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.